to control the spread of the virus and help Ireland's recovery. Let's keep working together and keep moving forward. Find out all of the details at gov.ie/COVID-19. Supported by the Government of Ireland.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
You're welcome back. It is time to take a look at the Sunday sports pages. Whether you're with us on the radio or on the OTB SPORTS app or on our social platforms, you are very welcome along. If you want to get in touch, you can tweet us at Off the Ball or drop us a text on 53106. Let's give you a flavour of what's leading the way today. So, Manchester City getting the job done against Crystal Palace yesterday is the main photograph there on the front of the Sunday Times sports section. Put the champagne on ice is the headline. Pep poised for league title celebrations if Klopp's men can beat Man United today. Young's out of Lions, Sexton still hopeful is Stephen Jones and Peter O'Reilly's latest news on the Lions. And Pogba, whose name comes up quite a bit across the back pages today, is reported here. Pogba agent proposes swap move with Hazard. Paul Pogba's future at Manchester United took a bizarre turn yesterday when Mino Raiola proposed a swap with Real Madrid's Eden Hazard. Raiola, who reportedly made £41 million in Pogba's move from Juventus to Old Trafford, has been intermittently agitating for the France midfielder to move to Real. That is a very interesting transfer story indeed, if there's truth in that. The Sunday Independent also leads with that photograph from Manchester City yesterday. Ferran Torres celebrating. Aguero strikes as Pep looks for a pool to do City a favour. Manchester City will be crowned Premier League champions at around 6:30 today if Manchester United lose to Liverpool. The Irish Mail on Sunday goes with Aguero, the hero again. Legendary striker puts City on brink of Premier title. And also in a column there was a late finish last night, but still printed in many of the newspapers. Katie retains world titles after thriller with Jonas. The Irish Star on Sunday. He'll be top pog is the main headline there. Paul's 400k a week. And Aguero, who else but Sergio, should seal the title. That is the back of the Star on Sunday. The Sunday Mirror goes with champagnes in the fridge. That is Pep Guardiola ready to celebrate today. And United mega deal for Pog. Manchester United will open talks with Paul Pogba about a new £400,000 a week contract this month. That story is also reported on the back of the Irish Sun on Sunday. United's flog Pog plan. Paul Pogba will be sold this summer if he refuses to commit to signing a new deal at Manchester United. And then the main headline there on the back of the Irish Sun on Sunday is Pop Idols. Pep, champagne is on ice for a title party. And Bish Bash Tash is the headline on Katie Taylor as she beats Natasha Jonas in their second matchup. One amateur, one professional matchup. Katie Taylor has won them both. And then the back of the Sunday World this morning. Klopp, we have lost the plot. Pool boss slams his strikers. The boys are not confident enough in the moment, they say. They don't use their first touch, said Klopp. And Super City surge to the title. Forgotten hero Aguero hits stunner as Pep's heroes close in on league crown. If it's not going to be today, it will be soon that Manchester City are crowned 2020-21 champions of the Premier League. So, to get stuck into some of the main stories from those papers, we have Louise Galvin with us, former rugby international, basketball international and Kerry footballer. Good afternoon, Louise.
Good afternoon.
And we have Dan McDonnell with us as well, football correspondent with the Irish Independent. You're very welcome along, Dan.
Afternoon.
So, only one place to start really when you look at the coverage this morning. Leinster against La Rochelle. And it seems that this build-up has been going on for quite some time. The added day you'd really notice in the newspapers, everybody trying to find an angle on Ronan O'Gara in particular that hasn't been covered before. I think we have reached peak Ronan O'Gara at this point, Louise.
Yeah, he certainly got a lot of the attention over the last few weeks, but he's just such an intriguing character. Obviously, he's a regular contributor to Off the Ball as well, and like he just, what other manager or coach would have so much time for media, and yet it seems like he's such a player's coach as well. Any soundbite he gives, there's an element, obviously he's not giving away any game plans or anything, but there's an element of truth in them. He's just not just rattling off the sound bites either. So he's a very intriguing character, and I think coming into this game, it's going to be an interesting one. I think Leinster will travel as favourites, even though it's on over in France. One interesting piece that ROG, he was speaking on Off the Ball, I think it was last week or the week before, about trying to get these La Rochelle players to really understand what a European Cup means, and trying to get, almost a team of mercenaries. Obviously, we have a huge Kiwi, South African, there's Aussie thrown in there, and a Fijian player to play for one another and play for what's in front of them, versus a Leinster squad, or when you've grown up in Leinster or Munster in the UK, you tend to know a lot more about the Heineken Cup or European Cup and have so much more of a focus on it. So even to hear him constantly talk about that kind of off the pitch stuff, I find just fascinating, and I think that's why we are so obsessed with him. That and wanting him to come back is just something he's never said is definitely going to happen. But everyone everyone in Munster had a bit of a deflated moment when they realised he was getting the head job in La Rochelle for another 3 years, signing on. It was like, he's staying on there. But I don't think there's any guarantee that ROG is moving anywhere fast.
I don't think the 3-year deal that was signed a couple of Fridays ago has actually quietened the coverage of Ronan O'Gara at all, Louise.
No, not at all. And I think he's absolutely right. Like, he spoke about how obviously it's a family decision, but I mean, going by his career since he's left Munster, or since he went into coaching, I'm sure his family haven't lived in Cork in an awful long time. So they're used to being in France more than anywhere else, and for them staying on is probably not as much of a change as opposed to a continuation of the norm. And for him, like, his stock is continuously growing, and Ireland has such a set way of playing rugby, and it's peters down from the national squad all the way down to the provinces, that the more that we have people like Ronan O'Gara and the likes of Mike Prendergast and these other coaches who are going away and getting all these external influences that are influencing how they coach and how they see the game, that if they do come back to Ireland, it's only going to be a positive to bring that kind of level of lateral thinking.
Yeah, for sure. One of the many angles covered over the course of the weekend is in Dennis Walsh's piece today in the Sunday Times. Masked Avenger is the headline. Friends, compatriots, but fierce rivals. O'Gara's relationship with Leinster is a very complicated one. So Dennis Walsh has spoken to Shane Horgan, amongst other people, in this piece to just get a sense of Ronan O'Gara's relationship with Leinster when he's in a Munster jersey, and his relationship with Leinster when he's in an Ireland jersey. And they're very different things. And I guess Donnacha O'Callaghan, who's also spoken to in this piece, he says ROG, Shane Horgan, Dennis Hickey and Dricko, they were always together in Ireland camp. They were always challenging each other, it seems. That Ronan O'Gara, when he was having conversations with them, wasn't just about being buddies, he was challenging himself. The conversations would be quite fulfilling, it seemed, but that when it came to it in a Munster-Leinster match, he would light any of them on fire. He would, said Donnacha O'Callaghan. It's interesting, Dan, Shane Horgan goes through this particular Ireland team, and he talks about O'Driscoll and he talks about O'Gara. He says the focus was on Brian as this wonder kid and Ronan as a fly half. He was the housewife's favourite. He was the kicker. He was super high profile. Brian and Ronan had a level of fame that the rest of us didn't experience. Their shared experience was built across that. And it is a good point. When it came to O'Driscoll and when it came to O'Gara, at that period in the mid-2000s, you'd be hard pushed to find a sports person more high profile with them plying their trade in Ireland.
Yeah, no, like it was. I mean, they had probably the first generation of those the modern professional sort of rugby stars in Ireland, and that 2000s sort of decade will always be associated with it, I think. And I think that's actually the striking thing. I mean, you kind of wonder how this game would have been previewed if O'Gara wasn't with La Rochelle, because I mean, it seems like absolutely everything is around ROG, and would it have been like that big in terms of the coverage, or the people would have to be more resourceful to find angles. But in saying that, I think actually across the various pieces across the weekend, you're going to, like that Dennis Walsh piece, as you mentioned, sort of probably centres in on his playing career and his relationships and stuff like that, how he sort of formed bonds with certain people. Then there's a few other places, like Rory Keane's piece in the Mail is about the birth of the coach, O'Gara, and the coaching journey that he's gone on. And that ties in. I mean, listen, my colleague Rory O'Connor yesterday had a really good piece where he actually spoke to O'Gara about his time in New Zealand. Is it with Scott Robertson, the sort of tip to be the next All Blacks coach, and spoke to him as well about O'Gara's growth and maybe how he needed, like to me, right, I'm not a big rugby fan, okay, but I still find O'Gara very interesting to listen to. So I think he's from like this new generation, as much as he's involved in the game, like a newer generation of like great sports people turned pundits who are really giving you something. I think Ruby Walsh I would put in the same bracket. Someone that every time he speaks, I find myself stopping to listen to him when it's talking about the mechanics of the sport and like aspects of rugby. To me, I find it hard to penetrate because it's not a game I'm that keen in. There's very technical aspects to it. Horse racing will be similar, I think, to a lot of people as well. Yet there are some people who I think O'Gara and Ruby actually just spring to mind for me that are actually very good communicators in terms of expressing and explaining things that are happening within their game and within their sport. And it's clear, like, you know, I don't think O'Gara, like a lot of people in the public eye for a long time, like he's been around for ages, like he's had his flaws, he's had his mistakes, he's had his detractors, his critics, but it seems like he's come through a lot of life experiences as quite a rounded individual. And it's just interesting across the various pieces today to just get a little nuggets and anecdotes here and there. I think in Dennis Walsh piece, how he was quite good pals with Malcolm O'Kelly, was it? And he embarrassed him in one of the big Leinster Munster games, and you know, rang him later that evening. And just little stories and bits that actually, yes, there's a bit of saturation, Rog, but like sometimes we can talk about that in the media and we can talk about it in paper reviews because we're maybe reading all the papers and following it all. But like some people might just pick up one paper across the weekend and want their ROG piece. And I think there's a fair sort of breadth of them across the various papers, I think. And some interesting stuff in there about someone who is a very interesting character. And it seems like, you know, his story has a fair bit left to run in it.
It seems as well that he represents almost a newer generation of sports person who is acutely aware of the pitfalls of being a successful player going into coaching. That it's obviously been a well-worn trope in football at this stage that great players don't make great managers. But it seems that O'Gara, I know in that piece with Rory O'Connor yesterday, said that if I had brought my playing mentality into my coaching career, I would have been dead by now. And that sort of thing, that people seem to be more acutely aware of what can happen if you don't change your ways and actually work as hard as a coach as you did in your early days as a player.
Well, I think the stakes are higher when you go into coaching, the higher profile you are, in a way. Yes, it can open doors that it won't open for other people, and it can be a massive advantage as well too. And you see that in all sports. People talk about Frank Lampard getting the Chelsea job earlier and so on. But there's no doubt, like, your status, you know, can open doors for you. But also it means that there's probably less forgiveness, you know, for your mistakes. And I think there's always that debate about when do you make that leap to being, like, you know, an assistant or, you know, a backup member, as it would be in rugby, like a backs coach, like to work with certain, you know, aspects of a team. But once you go out there, there's no going back. And it's interesting what Louise says, again, very much from the outside. It seems to me like there's a sense of destiny about that. There's an assumption that Roger's going to go to the Ireland job eventually. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it sort of feels like if this is the road that he's on, that you want to be as prepared as possible. Because in some respects, you know, all those people, the higher profile people who fail, like you hear a lot of them talking afterwards about how they weren't actually prepared, that they couldn't empathise and understand. I think that was a part of the aspect of his time in New Zealand that was referenced, that it appeared he was going in with the players and doing a lot of technical stuff, telling them about what to do, but maybe doing less of connecting with them as individuals and as, you know, as to build relationships. And I mean, to talk about other high-profile Corkmen, I mean, you know, that's sort of where Roy Keane struggled really badly as a coach. And you know, in terms of sort of probably being successful as a coach today, you need some of those interpersonal skills and communication skills. You probably can't rule by fear like you might have in a different generation.
Yeah.
I definitely think as well he has a huge amount of self-awareness. Like when he first got his first coaching ticket, it was as a kicking coach in Rassick, if I'm right, and then he gradually, like, I'm sure he could have had offers of going straight even to being an attack coach or a backs coach, but he took it a step lower, like, and just to get into that environment. So I think there's a massive amount of self-awareness there of what he could become, but what the boxes he needed to tick along the way. And as you say as well there, Dan, that kind of holistic approach he's definitely honed, because I'm not sure he would have been a hugely holistic player when he was at Munster. He was obviously incredibly driven, and he was the key attacker, obviously fly half, and the way Munster play, he was massive to how pivotal to how the team attacked, and the same when he was at his prime with Ireland. But he's very much listening to him now. He's particularly when you're talking about going away to New Zealand and France, where you have different nationalities coming in, like speaking, particularly about Bhatia and the Fijian. Like from playing in the 7 Series, I've seen up close what Fijian players are like and how they prepare, and you think, Jesus, these aren't tuned in at all. And then they just switch it on when they need to. It's almost like that level of understanding of how different players prepare. And then in Ireland, we've only a certain amount of, I suppose, exposure of international players coming in, South Africans or Kiwis, but generally they're coming to our culture, so they're adapting to our culture. So what's it like when you're actually taking them out, you're not playing and coaching in Ireland, you're going to a different country and you have to more adapt to them, or like him going over to the Crusaders. So I think he's bringing a huge amount of, we'd always back his I suppose his technical ability, his knowledge of the game, and his competitiveness. But what he's added is all those extra little bits. And even though he'll be taken over from John O'Gibbs, he's said that he very much wants to be on the field as much as he is at the moment, and that's hugely important to him. But he'll also be using those bus journeys to try and get to know his players as much as possible, because everyone is an individual at the end of the day, and different things make them tick. And I think he's kind of learned that as a coach, maybe more as he did as a player.
That comparison as well between O'Gara publicly and the change he's affecting in dressing rooms is interesting as well. In Peter O'Reilly's piece, he says the ROG Lovin reached a crescendo last month with an interview he conducted on BT Sport following their win in Gloucester. The KBA interview, as it is remembered, given that keeping the ball alive is one of the most rudimentary concepts in rugby union, you wonder whether it is a fascination with acronyms that caused the interview to go viral, or just O'Gara's ability to charm an interviewer and his audience. And O'Reilly makes the point that charm can also unify a group of men to success, that it's not necessarily clutching at straws to look at what Ronan O'Gara is saying publicly. They're not independent of one another, how he would communicate, say, after a big win in Gloucester, to how he would communicate to his players, Louise.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think he's someone who has a whole load of cloaks and daggers. I think he's, even as a broadcaster, even back in the day, sometimes, we all thought, everyone pays attention. You're looking like ROG could be nearly texting when an analyst is chatting, but you're still intrigued by him. There's almost this element of what you see is what you get. And obviously he's not going to be giving away, serious information, but at the same time, he's not leading you up the garden path of what he's saying, because it's clear to see as well. That kind of KBA interview, it was fantastic. I watched it back about 3 times because it was so simple, and yet every time you listened to it or you watched it, you felt you knew a bit more, or you understood it a bit more. And communication is so huge, so important. You could have best coach in the world, but unless he can get his message across to the players, him or her, and that they can understand it at their level, then it's futile, really. And he seems to have that skill.
If it's not Ronan O'Gara you're reading about in the rugby world in the papers this morning, it is probably going to be the British and Irish Lions. Dan McDonnell, your favourite subject?
Well, listen, it's not. But in saying that, it's sort of interesting, the scope or the breadth of coverage given to it. To me, it's almost like, think about the Lions it's like the great pub debate brought to life. The way people will, when people go to pubs whenever they're open, they'll sit around and talk about the best team to play, or people, Manchester United play Liverpool, do a joint 11 of the best 11 of the teams. And there's actually very few, and yes, you'll have your representative teams like the All-Stars, whatever, at the end of the year, or NBA All-Star teams that play a match and stuff. But the Lions is probably the one where you actually get to play that game a bit, but then there's actually games that come at the end of it. And while I don't have especially strong opinions on it, I sort of find the survival of it sort of interesting in its own way. When you have it's really about tradition, and each sport has its own traditions, and it's a bit like the Ryder Cup in golf. To some people from the outside, it's a bit of an odd one. When a lot of Europeans play in America now, but yet within that game, that rivalry sort of makes sense. And maybe to me, from the outside, I'm looking at going, well, hang on, we're talking about Ireland competing in a Rugby World Cup against somebody's top, against South Africa, and England clearly, have won a World Cup, and yet you have this concept where they come together, and you think it's kind of quirky. But obviously, it's also very commercially successful as well, and that's why clearly they were determined to save this no matter what. I mean, in all the COVID debates, I know there was talk of deferring it and then going to Australia and stuff. There obviously seemed to be a determination not to miss a year, because I presume if you miss a year, then does the concept get damaged or vulnerable in any way? I don't know. Maybe that's not the case, but it seemed like there was a real determination to keep it, because it is a great debate, and there is some interesting pieces. I like Stephen Jones in the Sunday Times talking about how parochial concerns can sometimes overtake a tour, and I suppose we had our national outpouring of grief when Brian O'Driscoll was dropped a couple of years back, which obviously raised questions about, well, are we invested in the results of this or not, or are we invested in the results of our players in this? And that was obviously, there have been flashpoints with that, but that's my take. I think Louise will be able to give more insight on the actual decisions that are being debated and faced, but there is a lot of coverage of it, certainly.
Yeah, Thursday is the big day when the squad gets announced. So everybody basically is picking their Lions squads, their Lions teams. Their Lions captain is a big subject up for debate. It's a good point you make about this idea of it being a pub debate that comes to life. I know I'm on my own here, but it's one of the reasons why I actually used to really like the international rules. And even though it made absolutely no it didn't move the dial for anybody seeing Ireland beat Australia or whatever, it was a pub debate that actually came to life. Who would be the best 15 players of the GAA counties around Ireland if they were put onto the team? The Lions actually has this tradition. So yeah, it's something to be embraced. Louise, it is the captain, isn't it, that seems to be garnering a lot of the interesting writing this morning?
Yeah, I mean, obviously whoever makes the plane, there's always huge speculation, and it's very difficult for anyone to accurately pick that, but I think it's interesting that this was the three players that are kind of being named most consistently amongst the papers anyway are Adam and Jones, for obvious reasons, and his leadership capabilities are, well, I don't have to remind anyone about them here. Maro Itoje, who again, then we have, question marks over his, certainly his discipline, certainly, a real attritional block to go down and take on South African, and a young, fit, like a guy that you'd imagine would last the pace over the 3 tests. And then our own Johnny Sexton, who again, if you look across the predicted squads, isn't making everyone's squad. So, it's always going to be a debate when a potential captain isn't even making everyone's squad. So that's definitely going to be one that's going to be quite an intrigue. I mean, you've Stuart Hogg, obviously captaining Scotland, and he's a definite name for the squad, or for the squad in total. But going down to South Africa, I'm not sure you'd have a full back as your captain necessarily. So I think we're going to see them closer to the coalface, or even at 10. So there's a huge amount of intrigue. And I agree with Dan as well. There's almost this real commercial element of it. And there was, initially a few months ago, I thought that the Lions tour isn't going to go ahead. But it just shows just how commercially viable it is that it is happening. Because you'd imagine, compared to your Six Nations or your Summer Tours, games that actually contribute to world rankings, even a Women's Rugby World Cup has been postponed. Like, essentially, the Lions Tour, although it's massively a proud moment for any player that's selected, it doesn't count towards any world rankings, towards any, I suppose, tournament qualification, but it was going ahead no matter what. It looks like the players will be pretty well lined out before they even take the plane. I think it's something like 9 tests before they leave for South Africa. It's just that juggernaut is just going to roll on because of that whole commercial element of it, which kind of, I think Michael Alwyn in the Sunday Independent, he was talking about how, the romanticism is nearly a bit washed off it a little bit at this stage. And yet we'd all tune in and be intrigued. But I have to say, even as a rugby fan, obviously there, and I'm a Lions supporter, but I wouldn't say I get absolutely devastated when they lose. And I think it's a bit of a bit like not even so much the international rules, because obviously I feel Irish, but I think it'd be great to go on a Lions tour for the crack. I don't think it would be the same as when you invest in, for example, Ireland going to a Rugby World Cup and you're supporting them there. So there is an element of almost voyeurism with it, just looking on, nearly more excited to see who's going to be selected.
Yeah.
And that kind of nationalistic, absolutely. Brian O'Driscoll, why was he dropped? You almost feel a bit like, geez, I hope Jonathan Davies does wrong or does poorly so that we can all stand up for for Brian O'Driscoll, which is wrong if we're all supporting the Lions. Like, so it's a little bit of a voyeuristic kind of element to it as well.
100%. That's where the intrigue is. I know that there's been a lot of people pushing the notion that this could be like a record Leinster involvement, for example, in the Lions. Whenever the squad comes out on Thursday, there'll be how many Irishmen are actually on the plane, and that is where we probably get our kicks from the Lions, and then the rest, I guess, is just from a pure sense of entertainment. That is basically the rugby coverage for us this afternoon. There's plenty more still to come after the news at 2 o'clock. Just to give you a quick preview of what's coming, there's loads on the return to GAA. Eamon Sweeney's got great stuff on the fact that it's just back, cherishing the fact that sport is back. We're going to have Mark Gallagher on GAA in Northern Ireland. That's a fantastic piece, and Dermot Crowe's got a brilliant piece on the 1961 All-Ireland final, so plenty on that front and loads on the soccer as well. There is also an interview in the Sunday Independent by Paul Kimmage speaking to one Gerard Gilroy. All of that coming up after the 2 o'clock news.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball. News Talk Extra, our email newsletter straight to your inbox. Sign up now at newstalk.com/extra.
At Guaranteed Irish, we believe enterprise is at the heart of thriving communities.
Did you know Gempack Foods have been making baking a piece of cake for the people of Ireland since 1967? Based in Damastown, County Dublin, they've been providing Ireland with gem baking ingredients that are good enough for Granny for over 50 years. Guaranteed Irish welcomes companies that are altogether better choices for our communities. So look out for it. GuaranteedIrish.ie. Altogether better.
Every time you hear AIB is lighting the way for someone to switch their mortgage, you see, we have offers to suit every kind of switcher. Talk to our switching team today to see just how much money you could save on your mortgage. Or get started on AIB.ie. AIB. We back belief. Lending criteria, terms and conditions apply. Allied Irish Banks plc and AIB Mortgage Bank UC are regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Available to stream on Star on Disney Plus, the Oscar winner for Best Picture, Best Director and Best Actress, Nomadland.
My mom says that you're homeless. I'm not. I'm just houseless. Don't worry about me. I'm okay.
Also the winner of 4 BAFTAs, including Best Film.
Isn't that great?
Don't miss the most celebrated film of the year, Nomadland. Available to stream on Star on Disney Plus. Subscription required. 18+. T&Cs apply.
This is Sean.
Oh no.
Sean's just opened his latest heating bill.
Not heating a small country, you know.
What Sean really needs is the Hub Controller, the only smart thermostat in Ireland, independently proven to save money on home heating bills.
Guaranteed savings of €20 a month. I'll take that.
And for a limited time, Sean can also buy the Hub Controller for just €100, saving €280.
Nice one.
Save on bills, save the planet. Visit thehubcontroller.com. T's and C's apply.
Our intercity trains are operating at 25% capacity, reserved for essential workers and those who are travelling for an essential service. That means everyone must pre-book their intercity ticket at irishrail.ie.
Thank you for helping us all stay safe. From Erin Road Éireann, part of the Transport for Ireland network.
Right now at Power City, claim up to €150 cash back when you purchase selected Neff home appliances. To find out more, go online to powercity.ie.
Having a flutter? Top tip, QuinBet.com. Ireland's newest online sportsbook and casino. For all your horse racing, football, casino and more, QuinBet has you covered. With live in-play markets on mobile, PC and app. QuinBet.com. Terms and conditions apply. Gamble responsibly. Visit gambleaware.ie.
Born from our expertise in Formula One, Renault E-Tech technology now features in our range of everyday hybrid and electric cars. Discover the #1 selling electric vehicle range in Ireland with finance from 0% APR, €1,000 green bonus and 3 months deferred payments. See why we are the #1 electric vehicle manufacturer in Ireland. Visit your local Renault dealer today. Offers made under a hire purchase agreement. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. Terms and conditions apply. See Renault.ie.
This is Air Gigabit Fibre Broadband, a faster, stronger, more reliable connection. Your own line straight to your home. The future at 10 times the speed of life. Get Air Gigabit Fibre Broadband today. Call 1-800-500-300 or visit air.ie. Air. Let's make possible. Subject to availability. For full terms and conditions, go to air.ie/gigabit fibre.
Afternoons are easy with insuremyvan.ie, Ireland's low-cost van insurance specialist. Get your business back on the road with Insure My Van's best price guarantee. For super savings, visit insuremyvan.ie. City Financial Marketing Group Limited, trading as insuremyvan.ie, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
News Talk already gives you your daily fix of news and entertainment. But wouldn't you like a little bit more? News Talk Extra is everything you might have missed, plus expert tips, podcasts and competitions, all straight to your inbox. Subscribe now at newstalk.com/extra. Across Ireland, this is the IMRO Radio Awards National Station of the Year. This is News Talk.
It's 2 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Murphy. 1.5 million people will have had a first dose of a COVID vaccine by the end of this weekend. The HSE says it plans to have given at least one vaccine to 30% of adults by today. A daily record of 45,000 doses were administered on Friday. Immunology professor at Trinity College, Kingston Mills, says it's important the capacity is there to administer a large number of jabs in the weeks ahead.
I think it seems to be pretty organised now with the nationals, with the centres around the country. So that combined with the GPs, I would hope that they would be able to administer the number of doses that hopefully we'll have available in the next few weeks and months.
The head of Neffet's modelling group says he has no concerns about the plan to reopen society over the summer. The planned easing of restrictions begins on Tuesday with the full return of construction, while inter-county travel and larger outdoor meetups will be allowed from next Monday. However, Professor Philip Nolan says variants could cause a bump on the road.
If B117 is at the upper end of that transmissibility, we could unfortunately see increases in case numbers. And that's why we have this very appropriately on government's part, very cautious approach.
Over 60% of people in the Republic fear a return to violence in Northern Ireland over the prospect of a border poll. 2/3 of those surveyed by the Sunday Independent and Cantor in the north are also worried that talk of a united Ireland could put peace at risk. Fianna Fáil TD Jim O'Callaghan says any debate on the issue has to be calm and reasoned.
We cannot allow violence to dictate what happens on this island. On the centenary of partition, we need to recognise that what will decide what happens on this island is democracy and the votes of people.
A status yellow wind and rain warning has been issued for 11 counties. It'll be in place for Clare, Cork, Kerry, Limerick, Waterford, Donegal, Galway, Leitrim, Mayo, Sligo and Wexford from 3 a.m. until 10 p.m. tomorrow. Met Éireann's Andrew Doran Sherlock explains what we can expect.
So we are expecting to see some quite intense rainfall at times, some thundery bursts possible, and the winds will be quite strong. Now, it will mainly be in coastal areas, but it will still be quite windy inland.
It's 2 minutes past 2.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. The forecast today is low fares, on-time flights and improving customer service.
Mainly dry today with sunny spells and isolated showers, staying cool with highest temperatures 9 to 13 degrees. And you're up to date on News Talk.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
You're welcome back. Louise Galvin and Dan McDonnell with us reviewing the Sunday sports pages. We're going to have live commentary of Leinster against La Rochelle from 3 o'clock this afternoon, and then from 4:30 it is Manchester United against Liverpool in the Premier League. We'll also have live commentary of that one. Right, so we are turning our attention to the GAA, which is covered pretty extensively in the papers this morning. A load of different stories to get into. Louise, I think there's just this general sense of excitement that hops off the pages, that it has been brilliant to have had so much sport, mainly through TV, over the last little while, but there's something more parochial about the GAA coming back, even if people aren't going to be at games, but especially for people like yourself who've been back training over the last little while and cherish the return. We deserve it is the headline on Eamon Sweeney's piece, which I think sums up your mood, I suspect.
Yeah, just in the door from training myself, not too far from your own home spot on. And it's just fantastic. Like, it's the buzz that you get. Like, for me, it's coming back into, I'm a new player back into the squad because there's been so much change down in Kerry, but still, like, I feel like I've knocked 15 years off my age profile, skipping in the door, and don't skip out as well as I skipped in, but it's brilliant to be back. And like, you just forget that endorphin release. Like, we've been training away yourself on your own, but to actually get back into the team environment is huge. And I actually really enjoy just driving past or walking or cycling, whatever, past a pitch, whether it be a GAA pitch or a soccer pitch in the last week or so, and seeing kids out training and playing with massive gum shields hanging out of their mouth and bibs too big for them, and half of them are just chatting to their friends. But there's such a wholesomeness to it, and it actually nearly reminds me as well of how much we owe the volunteers that run all these clubs. Like, it's huge, and like anything, it's only when it's gone you really realise how much they're contributing to our communities. So it's pretty awesome to have not only the inter-county, I suppose, side of it back, but also to have the underage and the kids back training again. It's huge.
Dan, did you feel you got this kickback when the League of Ireland came back to full action?
Well, yes and no. I mean, you do, but like, you still, I mean, you miss people, like, you know, like the games. Like, I appreciate there's this excitement about games returning, and I think you speak to, like, you know, people like Louise who are involved, and you know, athletes who are involved who are sort of playing and contribute, and they have that routine and structure and regularity back in their lives that they miss, and clearly, like, with kids training, that's back now. But like, the games themselves without fans, for me, unfortunately, they're pretty. Like, it's a pretty soulless experience, and you now find yourself longing for the next step, which is, you know, to limited supporters in stadiums, because, and particularly the League of Ireland, really, it's about the atmosphere and the people, and you know, that's part of the colour of it, really. So without it, it can be pretty bleak at times. And I think, you know, it's one thing that, like, there's obviously a great buzz in the last couple of days, you know, last week, but for me, I still don't think that. You know, getting some kind of limited supporters back to stadiums, it's not high enough up the agenda for me personally. Now, I appreciate that it can be quite complicated, particularly when you branch it out to, say, all codes and all sports, and it's probably a numbers game to some degree, like the operational, you know, you can't just necessarily handpick certain games. And I mean, they are going to do that for a trial, I think. But, you know, I appreciate there's complications with that, but I'm not just answering your question honestly. I mean, yes, I felt that in February when I had games to go to again to report on, but the more games you go to, the more you miss people being there. I really can't stress that enough.
Yeah, like Eamon Sweeney's suggesting that the GAA should be more in focus for these trials to get fans back. He says it's encouraging to have a July trial involving Leinster Rugby, but that the GAA maybe should be more.
I don't think there should be a competition. I don't like that. I don't think there's any more worthy than the other personally. You know, I think whatever we can do, people who go to whatever sport are missing their sport equally. You know, there's no hierarchy of who's missing who. Like, I understand the point that he's making, and I'm very conscious of how the spread of GAA is so vast, because it touches every sort of village and town and so on. But you know, I don't agree with that mindset. I think there's a lot of, you know, think of like indoor sports and basketball and stuff that don't get the same mention. Like, sometimes a lot of this is focused through the GAA, a lot of the coverage, and I have a slight issue with that sometimes. I think all sports, all codes, everyone's missing it the same, and I think any trials that are done, I think it should be across, you know, a number of sports at the same time, rather than just picking one because it's more worthy. I don't particularly like that language myself, to be honest.
It is striking that you have the return to play kind of jubilation with regards to the return to play in the newspapers, and then right beside it you've got preview for the Alliance Hurling League next weekend, Louise. It is quite striking that this is happening so soon, that competitive action is next week, and it feels like training has only just come back.
Yeah, and even though I was looking at the dates, I was kind of like, what? The hurlers are back next weekend? I mean, they obviously only would have had 2 weeks training done by today, and they'll taper down this week. Like, as a physio as well, I just think obviously they've had to do this because of fixtures, but the injury risk there is huge, and what's going to be massively important is who has done, I suppose, enough of the work before the squads got back together, and then not to overdo it now, because even compared to, like, I know we had a bit of a condensed season there last winter, but the ground is so much different. Like, I know coming off, like, we have a serious amount of training done individually, but like my groins and my calves, it's so much different when you're trying to react to an open environment, that kind of open skill level of having multiple people around you all going at a fast frenetic pace. So, like, even on our tendons and our ligaments, it's different when you're playing on firm ground like we are at the moment. And sure, listen, we're delighted, it's brilliant, but there's going to be a whole element of kind of injury prevention. And of course, anyone picks up even a medium term injury now, they're going to, you know, lose their spot for a while. So I think the squads that have the best kind of balance of not overtraining, because we can't spend a whole lot of time in the park at the moment. It's just too close to game time, particularly for the hurlers. That are the squads that are going to have, you know, more fit players to choose from when it comes down to the crunch games. But yeah, it's mad to think they're talking out already this weekend. Like, I mean, 2 AVB games or internal games, and that's it. They're off.
Yeah, for sure. The injuries is something to keep an eye on. Obviously, Mayo already had their scare with Aidan O'Shea, which thankfully doesn't look too bad at this standpoint, but I'm sure there's going to be more of those stories over the next little while. Dan, one story that caught your eye, caught all of our eye, I think, this morning is in the Irish Mail on Sunday, page 64 and 65. Mark Gallagher has got a special report called Across the Divide, as Northern Ireland marks 100 years of existence. We look at GAA's attempts to win over both communities. So tomorrow is the centenary of Northern Ireland coming into existence when the border was created on this island. This is a really fascinating look down into what the GAA is doing across the divide in the north to try and attract more unionist heavy areas into the playing of Gaelic games.
Yeah, I think this is, like, every time I do the Sunday paper review, it feels like you're talking about a good Mark Gallagher piece, but I think he tends to sort of find something not quite left field, like, you know, because obviously there's a lot of debate around, you know, the Northern Ireland 100 years of existence and polls and whatnot, but like just to sort of bring it to sport and take something like Arlene Foster's legacy being discussed this week, the fact she obviously went to you know, one of not the first DUP politician, as he pointed out, to attend the GAA match, but it was quite high profile when she did. And yet just to delve into this area of the GAA in the north, you know, and I mean, there's a lot in it. And as much as I'd like to think I'm up in my history, like, there was actually little bits and bobs and details in here that I wasn't necessarily aware of. I think probably you were the same, because it's referenced by maybe one or two contributors in the piece that one of the issues, like Linda Irvine, the sister-in-law of David Irvine, the sort of well-known, you know, he was a unionist voice in the peace process, but someone who was involved in, you know, the troubles, very, you know, going back in time. But you know, her speaking about, like, she's probably an advocate for some degree for this integration that you're speaking about. But for example, I think the point was made that the GAA's constitution saying that one of the aspirations is a 32 county republic. I actually wasn't aware personally that was in the GAA's constitution myself. Maybe that's common knowledge, but there's an interesting detail in there from Colin Bradley, the former Fermanagh footballer, who was also played Irish League soccer football. He makes the point that it was only inserted into the constitution in 1971 in an effort to appease the more hardliners when the ban was finally lifted, as in the ban on attending foreign sports, any GAA member doing it. And it's always very striking that when there's big debates about the direction of big decisions around, say, the GAA opening up to some degrees, like there was the Security Forces Rule 21, which was removed in 2001. But even in the Croke Park, opening up Croke Park debate, there was a lot of strong opposition from the Ulster counties at that point. And clearly, like, it's a heavily, you know, complex point because, you know, for so many people, I remember Dermot Crowe in the Sunday Independent last year doing a very good piece around an iconic photo from the Troubles in the 80s of, I think it was around Lochgiel, and a couple of boys hurling on the street in Belfast when there was like a British Army patrol hovering around them. And clearly for so many people in the north, like, the GAA is very much tied in with being an expression of their identity. And as a result, like, you know, the idea, it's an area where sort of trying to find harmony has been quite difficult. And even within that, like, it's just something I'm always interested in. Like, after all, the Mount Rushmore series on various counties. And I remember talking to a Dundalk player a couple of years back about how the Dundalk dressing room had a mix of, say, you know, guys from Dublin, guys from around the sort of Southern Ireland, I suppose, you know, the 26 counties, and then they had quite a strong Derry contingent in the dressing room, and how they'd be on the bus discussing GAA, and like one of the lads from Derry thought like the All-Ireland was every 4 years, the final, you know, like sort of remarkable stuff that you almost couldn't get your head around it, but that actually even in parts of Derry, which would be like Catholic parts of Derry, their awareness of GAA would be completely different to other parts of like the province, you know. It's sort of incredible, really. And this piece to me just sums up the sort of the complex web that it is there. I mean, Colin Bradley references that he was playing in the Irish League with Ballymallard. He was looking at players on the pitch from the Protestant tradition thinking they'd be great GAA players. But so many of them, for whatever reason, have never felt like, listen, we know obvious reasons why they don't feel it's the sport for them. But for some who would be a bit more open-minded to it, there's obviously a challenge to maybe welcome them in the door, So I just think it's a very good all-encompassing piece on what is a pretty complex topic.
Yeah, for sure. Diarmuid Marsden, the former Armagh footballer, is also quoted in the piece. He's from Lurgan himself. I remember we had Jacob Stockdale on the show last week, who is from Lurgan in Armagh as well, and he was talking about actually playing Gaelic games and the effort that has been made in recent years to try and integrate a little bit more. That he picked up a Gaelic football when he was in his 20s or in his late teens at least as part of that, which is pretty class. And Marsden talks about the fact that they would enter an All-Britain Championship. A team from Banbridge would enter, and he says he remembers a few years ago one of the teams came from Banbridge, and we travelled on the 12th of July. The night before, some of the boys would have been at their local bonfires, that is part of their cultural celebrations, and the next day they are packing their GAA gear into their bag and heading to London to play in a Gaelic football tournament. It's phenomenal stuff like this, and as you say, Linda Irvine, who's quoted in this piece, her real bugbear is the nationalistic connection that the GAA still maintains in its law book or in its rule book, essentially, that idea there that it was put in to appease those people who were against the removal of the ban at that point. And she says that clubs and grounds being named after hunger strikers or IRA volunteers is one of those issues, pointing out quite reasonably that nationalists wouldn't be comfortable if a club was named after someone who was in the UVF or LVF. It's a fascinating piece, Louise. A load of different complicated things, and like stuff like the East Belfast project as well. There is some brilliant work going on to try and address some of these issues.
Yeah, and I have to say as well, Owen, certainly from my point of view, like thinking I'm growing up in a real GAA stronghold, I certainly didn't feel, I don't know if you felt, but sometimes I think when we're down the opposite end of the country growing up, didn't really have an understanding or of an awareness of, I suppose, how much of an identity it was to be playing Gaelic games when you're living in the north, or how, as one of the quotes from the article stated, I think, I'm not sure it was from Colin Bradley himself, that in Fermanagh half the county is underwater and half the other half don't want to play a Gaelic game. So I thought it was particularly good. Obviously you want to harness as much talent as you can get, and Fermanagh has one of the lowest senior players in terms of numbers available nationwide. But I think in terms of the GAA moving forward, I actually wasn't aware either that one of the goals of the GAA was that we'd have a 32 county nation. When you compare that with, people up north, 2/5 or so wanting to not be unionist or nationalist, they just want to be Northern Irish. That doesn't align with that 2/5 of the population there either. So you're probably cutting out 3/5, if not more, of the population. And when we're looking at Ireland in terms of being multicultural anyway, and bringing in, we have people from all over the world now living and playing Gaelic games from grassroots up. What do they know or care about a 32 county Ireland? They see Ireland as it is today. So maybe it is something that needs to be looked at, particularly if you have great work being done in the likes of Banbridge and East Belfast by the likes of Diarmuid Marsden, and they're trying to say, look, come on in, we're actively trying to seek out that Protestants now play Gaelic football. Well, it's an obvious deterrent if you turn around and like that you see some of the rules that are still in situ, as Linda Irvine pointed out. And it is funny, we had a little bit of that with rugby as well. I mean, I would have lived with Ashley Baxter's from County Down, as I'd call it. And she asked me one day where the green and gold bunting I'd put on my bags to just make my bag different when it came off the carousel when we travelled. She asked me, did I make them? And I was like, headbands. For me growing up, headbands are absolutely part of summer and you pick one up every year. But she didn't know what it was. And she was like, how come you have so many of them? And it's that kind of ability to use sport, if you can separate it from politics and then use it to transcend those communities, it can be so powerful. So that was a really good piece, and I really enjoyed reading it, and more power to those men and women up there who are doing such good work.
Yeah, it's in the.
I think it's interesting. I mean, we're not bringing this down as sort of political chat. I do think probably in our lifetime we're going to have some kind of border poll. I think that is going to happen at some stage, and there's no doubt that the GAA is going to be challenged by that. That all these topics are going to become a subject of debate. I mean, listen, there have been. I think Joe Brolly and people have written at various times about stories of the Troubles where, people around GAA clubs would have been targeted at times. There's obviously a deep emotional connection in some cases with the relationship between the GAA club, but that obviously to people on the other side can be alienating too. And I think I think it's a very relevant piece because I feel like a lot of this history we're going to be returning to it again. And when, in my view, that does happen at some stage in the future, but the GAA is going to face a lot of challenges diplomatically in terms of how they approach it.
Yeah, for sure. Even that idea of it having a 32 county ambition in the rule book, that obviously is at odds with people that they want to encourage to play the game if they want to try and move into different areas of Northern Ireland in particular. So it's going to be really interesting. It's going to have either a part to play or it is going to be affected by the move towards a border poll for sure. One other quick GAA story we wanted to mention before we move on is in the Sunday Independent. John Green writing that clubs driving change in a real meaningful way. So this is the one club model, Louise, which is essentially the fact that it breaks down the barriers between the LGFA or the Camogie Association and the GAA, that nationally you have 3 different organisations running the show, but at club level quite a lot of setups have a one club model which breaks down those barriers completely. This has meant essentially, subsidising the fees that some young girls would have in order to play with clubs. That's one of the things that they've gone towards. And generally, this has been an actual way of putting people's money where their mouth is and actually supporting real and meaningful change and ensuring that access to pitches and access to facilities is actually fair game across genders when it comes to Gaelic games in clubs. Is this something new in your experience, Louise, or has this been happening for quite some time?
No, I don't think it's new. I think, in general, your under 5s, 6s, under 7s, boys and girls are all thrown in together at the local club, which is invariably the male club's pitch because most female GAA clubs don't have their own pitch. Now, fair enough, because you have less female GAA clubs around the country. For example, my own club, Finreg, are amalgamated with the neighbours St. Senans, so we're Finreg St. Senans, and we equally go between the 2 pitches, but they're 2 male clubs separately. But at that kind of underage level, just like my nephew and niece last week, they're down to the pitch together, and it's only when you probably get... I would say as a girl, you only really are aware of this separation when you start to get to maybe representational squads around under 14 or so, when you realise, actually there's a completely different association. And then that's when you start to see the disparity between maybe what's available to the female versus the male version of the game. But the club is that positive element that gets it all started and gets it all going. And at the end of the day, certainly if you're a representational player, it's where you come back to as well and where it's all tied in. And it is that kind of benevolence that has helped the growth of LGFA and our ladies Gaelic players in both camogie and in ladies football. But I don't want to go down to a debate of poor females and poor athletes that are out of pocket and that. I think this is a good piece about how we don't necessarily have to align them separately the whole way down, because it doesn't make any sense and it wasn't done that way. But invariably, once we get to that representational stage, we do tend to separate back out again. And I think the days of, the girls getting kicked off the pitch because the lads want to warm up, I'd like to think that's not happening. I don't think it is. Fair enough, there might be, you mightn't get the prime slot, but once you have that protected slot, I think that's a start, and that you're allowed on every pitch, not just on the back pitch or the one that's not lined. I think there's a lot more equality or equity within the club structure, certainly, and we do have to be quite grateful for that too. But having said that, the club isn't set up around the male members of the club. Even if you have your senior male team, there's always there's the mothers, there's the sisters, there's the supporters. There's a huge, because GAA is such a community sport, it's entrenched across families, and it's families that run those sports. It's families that are doing all the fundraiser and the lotto and that sort of thing. So I think it's less of an issue because it's just been there all along. And the more young girls who've started playing the game, they're just as welcome down there as the young boys.
Yeah, for sure. And John Green does zoom out a little bit, does look at the inter-county level and quotes Gemma Begley from the WGPA saying that players are out of pocket due to their sport. I know Darren O'Sullivan was talking about that as well on the show this week about the expenses, and that's still just not at an acceptable level when it comes to inter-county football and camogie. There's a good piece from Colm O'Rourke, something completely different on page 8 of the Sunday Independent, talking about all-style goalkeepers putting the fear of God into forwards. There's actually good goalkeeping content across the papers this morning, just by pure coincidence. It seems that Colm O'Rourke piece goes through some of the classic names like Martin Furlong, who would combine the roles of peacekeeper, law enforcer, stopper and kicker out. He was a brilliant servant to Offaly for almost 2 decades, and a good many forwards, myself included, knew what was coming if you backed into the square with a high ball coming in. It was time for a quick prayer. So he paints the picture of those old school goalkeepers who, of course, have been usurped by Stephen Cluxton, and the art of perfection when it comes to the goalkeeper, which, Dan, is not too dissimilar from, it's amazing to say this, from the Jonathan Northcroft piece. Colm O'Rourke and Jonathan Northcroft kind of colliding for one great theme today. He's talking about Ederson in the Sunday Times, talking about him as a potential Football Writers Association Player of the Year. I hadn't heard this touted too much, but now that he paints the picture, it's a fairly compelling case. Goalkeepers don't tend to get many of the accolades when it comes to English football, and in fact some of the great teams actually don't get as many accolades as they might think they should get.
Yeah, I think it was pointed out that of that sort of City generation of like Aguero and who else was mentioned? I think it was Company and Silva, Company, Touré and Aguero, have gone through the English game without a single Footballer of the Year recognition. And this is always the case. Like you occasionally have towards the end of someone's career where they try and right or wrong. I sort of thought Aguero would have a chance if he had a really good season this year, but it's been ruined by sort of injury. You get that, didn't Ryan Giggs get it at the end of his career? It's almost like a lifetime achievement award as opposed to like a particular season. But yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the crossover, the Colm O'Rourke piece, which basically is summed up as goalkeepers a bit mad, really, aren't they? And that was sort of the line about goalkeepers, and a lot of commentary was, well, you have to be mad to be a goalkeeper, whereas now, no, to be a goalkeeper in a lot of codes, you more so need to be a prototype of sort of a particular style of goalkeeper that is needed, and that certainly seems to be the case in GAA. And I've spoken to people like Gary Rogers, who's gone coaching in that world, who've come from the League of Ireland to coaching GAA, and maybe talking about how there wouldn't necessarily be a great history there in technical coaching of goalkeeper and goalkeepers, and he always felt that was a growth area, could be developed to suit the sort of demands of that sport now. And certainly, as you see now with Ederson, Jonathan Northcroft references a moment early in the second half of the PSG game, which I actually do remember, where Mbappe was a great through ball, and of course when you're watching it on TV, you don't have the full sort of panoramic shot. So this great through ball is played. You think, oh, great chance here. And all of a sudden, Ederson comes into the screen to take the ball away. But interestingly, you would have seen Gavin Bazunu play for Ireland, in March, who of course is at Man City now, and again has that ability to come off that line, and that's almost part of the brief. That's what you do now. And Bazunu was taken to City not just because he was a good keeper, it's because they spotted that some of his attributes, were suited to what they want and demand from a goalkeeper. And Ederson is very much reflective of that now. And the case for him to be considered, I can see why he's in the mix for sure. I don't think he has a chance of winning it personally, but I think obviously it's a valid point to raise. And to be honest, a lot of the football stuff today, I know Liverpool are playing Man United, but it doesn't really have that massive sort of big game intensity hanging over it. Jonathan Northcroft references another piece how some of the recent games between them have been so disappointing. But I think also as well is because while there is Champions League places to play for, we're a small bit in the junk time of the season in the Premier League. Yeah. The Champions League race is quite interesting, but it's not like that Liverpool. We've had a couple of really big Liverpool United games in recent memories that have been really this is the big game that could define the season. Today wouldn't tick that box.
No, for sure. I think there's a good nugget as well in the Northcroft piece about Ederson, that those great teams maybe don't get the individual accolades they deserve. Ginola winning Footballer of the Year during the treble season is something that still winds up Manchester United fans. And to kind of come full circle on the goalkeeper point, it got me immediately thinking about Stephen Cluxton not maybe getting as many All-Stars as a lot of Dublin fans will say he deserved down through the years. So it's a really interesting piece, worth checking out. We're into the last 5 minutes or so here, folks. There are still a couple of really good pieces you want to get to. I think we should probably touch on the 4-page spread, shall we, in the Sunday Independent today. Paul Kimmage's 4-pager with Ger Gilroy. Ger Gilroy is back where he started, behind the mic and off the ball, having lit the fuse of the Irish sports broadcasting revolution. Moving the dial is the headline on this, with a collection of photos with Ger over the past couple of years, some more recent ones in this. This is obviously great crack to be able to discuss this on the Sunday Paper Review. I am, of course, sitting in for Joe Malloy. It would have been even greater crack had Joe Malloy been sitting in the main seat today.
Did Joe know?
I don't know.
There's something... he's well timed. He's probably he might be doing something else. I think.
Do Virgin have the Leinster game today? I don't think they do actually. So why isn't Joe Malloy here?
That was his excuse. Yeah, I find this one slightly strange as an independent staffer who contributes regularly to Off the Ball, appearing on the Off the Ball newspaper review, talking about reviewing an independent interview with the head of Off the Ball, and I'm thinking, Louise, what do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's an exchange in the last column of the 4-pager here where Kimmage asks Ger, what about ego? And Ger's like, what about it? You don't have one? Everybody has an ego. And Kimmage says, you describe Joe Malloy as the best sports broadcaster in the country. And Ger says, he is. He's won 4 of the last 5 IMROs. How many have you won? 3. So it's up to me, who has won 0 IMROs, has never been nominated for an IMRO, to bring you the breakdown of this piece today. There are 2 interesting themes in this, like, in fairness, that we can properly tease out. It is the idea of what people want from their sports coverage and from their media coverage nowadays. In many ways, this is interesting, I guess, just from my perspective, to get Kimmage's take on Off the Ball as much as anything else, because this really shines through in the piece. There's one really quick question that he asks: what's the point of video? So he gets talking to Ger about the movement towards video, the movement towards more digital audience, and he's like, what's the point of video? In that question, you can probably guess what he thinks of video. And then he talks about the dilution of coverage. So Kimmage asks, so you've spread Off the Ball wider, but what about the perception that it's become diluted? That what once made it great is not as great anymore? It's certainly different. And then Ger says, that's your polite way of saying you don't like it as much these days. Kimmage says, no, I don't. An example, I tuned in the other night and there was half an hour devoted to Nathan Murphy's dilemma about his son wanting an England jersey. Seriously, half an hour. That's taking the piss. And then Ger laughs. He says, that's one of the most spoken about pieces we've done in a long period of time. The next day it became a massive topic of conversation. And that's a really interesting dilemma for a lot of people right now about what they want, about the serious sports coverage or the fun stuff. My personal view is that they can both coexist very happily, and they should both coexist very happily. But at the same time, you can appreciate people who like the very straight up, old school journalistic style of sports broadcasting as well. So I'm not sure what you make of all of this, Louise.
Yeah, no, I think it does raise some interesting thoughts, and it's not, it's a good article because it makes the reader think about what they prefer. Like, certainly I find for someone who sport is their life, but there's so much sport on to keep up, that I love the video content, because if you do miss something, it's impossible to keep up with everything. You have that kind of visual animation of a synopsis of the game or of a point of what's come up out in the media in the last few days. So I certainly like the video option, but I like the seriousness and the fun bit as well, because it's a bit like, a conversation you can have with your friends who are actually really interested in in the same thing, which is sport, and it can be quite in depth and quite serious. And I think obviously Off the Ball have such brilliant contributors. Such a depth knowledge and awareness of games but at the same time, you could just making dinner and there's a quip about something completely irrelevant. You just feel like you're listening to friends having a chat at times. I personally really like that, and I think that's why it is successful, because I don't all want to hear this kind of serious prototype of, is particularly when you're doing interviews with players and they're so well media trained, like that's boring. That's sports media gone the wrong way. And we do want those interviews. We do want to hear the likes of the managers and the players before and after the game, but bringing it back to the start of the show, we love someone like ROG, who's just a bit different and a bit more honest and a bit more unique. We still crave that sort of, I suppose, information and that knowledge. And as well, I think he talks about it being diluted. As what I like about Off the Ball, it's not just about the big three, which the rugby, the soccer, the GAA. There is that ability to, jump on something that's just happened that's new. Having said that, I know we haven't even got round, it hasn't been in the papers much, to the 4x400 relay or the 4x100 girls from yesterday, but it's, okay, dilution is one way of looking at it, but it's also trying to cater for all tastes and all needs, and, it's not just devoted to the same three top sports in male sport with that as well. So, dilution is one way of looking at it, but I think it's catering for a broader audience.
I find it really interesting as well, the influence maybe on, like someone that some of the ilk of Eamon Dunphy would have had on the entire industry. Like Ger says, what Dunphy did with The Last Word is actually an important cultural moment in independent broadcast radio in this country. It meant we could have other conversations outside of what was going on in RTE. Like, I find that particular conversation really interesting. Gay Byrne as well, and the way that maybe he didn't really care too much about the wrath of his bosses if he said something on air, and that's a really important cultural moment in media and in broadcasting in this country. There are tons of fascinating nuggets in this. I know I'm kind of I have my tongue in cheek quite a lot talking about this, as you can imagine, but it's an excellent piece. There's really good stuff on Gerard's stint on News Talk Breakfast. Is really good stuff on Second Captains and their departure from News Talk as well. If you're unfamiliar with any of those stories, you'll be up to speed on all of that, and it's all covered in really good detail. It's 4 pages in the Sunday Independent, and as ever, Paul Kimmage delivers the goods. Just very finally, Dan, just before we wrap up, I'm sorry to have to squeeze you now into 30 to 60 seconds here, but the piece on Leona Maguire is something you wanted to draw everyone's attention to as well.
Oh yeah, it's worth mentioning that Dermot Gillee's piece on Leona Maguire, and actually I think, and Louise actually made the point there, that you don't want every piece about sort of women in sport to become about the issue of financial issues and sort of that battle that has been faced, because you want to look beyond that. But in saying that, this is a pretty striking piece in that area, and that Leona Maguire is is coming into women's golf at a time when there's much more opportunity available than there would have been 20, 30 years ago. And just one little thing that struck me about Maureen Medill, it was a broadcaster now, but very good golfer in the 80s, had an entire productive season in 1987. Her tournament earnings for 13th in the money list amounted to a modest £16,000. Now, I know you could say that's a lot, an old money or whatever, but £16,000, for a year, I presume, of travel and stuff like that. And the piece touches on how a load of amateur golfers at that time just couldn't justify going professional because it just wasn't worth it. Leona Maguire is getting the chance to do that now, and by all accounts, she's going to do a very good job of it.
Yeah, no, she's having a brilliant year so far, to say the least. Listen, Dan McDonnell, Louise Galvin, a pleasure as ever. Thanks a million for that today.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Owen.
It is 2:36 p.m. We are, 24 minutes away from kick-off in La Rochelle against Leinster. It is a massive Heineken Champions Cup semi-final, and we've got all the build-up with Bernard Jackman right after these.
Anything happen to you? Join the DSPCA's Pet Guardian programme and enjoy peace of mind in knowing that we'll find a suitable home for your pet if you're no longer there to care for them. Find out more about the DSPCA's